Okay, so we are going to be looking at some of the cards that have been released so far for the Whispers of the Old God expansion. Specifically, we are looking at the first 15 cards, 12, yeah, 15 cards that have been released. And the main card that a lot of attention has been focused on so far is Cthulhu. So I'm going to start my review with Cthulhu, and then we're going to look at all of the neutral cards, and then we're going to examine the class cards that have been released so far. Okay, so Cthulhu. I think first of all that Blizzard has tried to introduce Cthulhu as something of a new standard for what deck building will live up to. One of the things that they have done, which I really appreciate, is they've made it so that you get Cthulhu for free. You get Cthulhu in the first pack that you open after this expansion is released, and that allows new players to have a legendary they can start building towards right away. And it really suggests that they're trying to move this as something that is playable at all levels of play, that can be successful, and is kind of the control budget deck, which will help out new players, because previously we only saw a lot of aggro budget decks, and to be a control player you needed spend a lot of money on big legendaries, and people couldn't afford that. So I like this card in principle. On the actual stat side of it, it is a 6/6 for 10 mana, and it will gain stats through all of the other synergy cards that get played throughout the game. So I think on average when you play Cthulhu, you could expect to have around a 10/10 to a 14/14 creature, and it deals its attack damage immediately to the board when it's played. The creature itself is reasonably weak to Big Game Hunter, but because it is doing something as soon as it's played to affect your opponent's board, and possibly even lethal them, because 14 is a lot of damage, can easily burst someone down with that if they had an empty board. I think this is a very competitive creature, and it's going to set a lot of standards for the game moving forward as kind of a deck others are balanced around. But we're going to look at some of the other synergy cards that go with it, and those really make up the power of what Cthulhu is. On its own, it's a little hard to understand quite where it's at. Okay, so we're just going to go in order here of the neutral cards. The next one is the Validated Doomsayer. Personally, I don't see this having much use. It's more of a niche card. It has some slight advantages, such as the fact that it cannot be Big Game Hunted on the turn that it's played, because it has no attack, and then it only gets attack when the players who it belongs the player who it belongs to is ready to use it. But it is weak to silence. It just has no attack. Then it's a useless creature, so I don't think we would see this played too much. It's more for a very specific type of deck. Corrupted Healbot, also a very specific type of deck, definitely a priest card. It's a 6/6 for 5 mana, which is really good. Normally you would expect a 4/6 for 5 mana to be ideal stats, so this just has 2 extra attack. It does heal the opponent when it dies, so it has a disadvantage, but as a priest you could use this with Akanai Soul Priest, and 8 damage will actually be dealt to the opponent, which is a huge amount of damage, plus you got a 6/6. So you could really make something happen with this in a priest deck, I think. Beckoner of Evil. Okay, so this is the start of what we examine as the Cthulhu synergy cards, and it looks like a pretty decent card. It's a 2/3 for 2 mana. Very competitive defensive stats, leans itself towards control decks. It has a battle cry wherever your Cthulhu is, give it +2/+2. So essentially this battle cry is the equivalent to deal 1 damage randomly, because this is a flame juggler with the exact same mana cost with the same stats. The only difference is the battle cry, and a flame juggler will deal 1 damage randomly. So it's not 100% as good as another 2-drop, but it's able to fill the spot, and it gives you that late game control style of working towards your Cthulhu finisher. Okay, the next card up, Polluted Hoarder. 4 mana, 4/2 Death Rattle draw card. This is interesting. I think it has some potential. 2 health is removed pretty easily. The one thing that is hardest to tell is that the 4 mana creature slot is really up for grabs right now, with Shredder being removed with the introduction of Standard. 4 mana suddenly becomes a lot more competitive between the types of creatures you have. It's hard for me to say if I like this one or not. I think time will tell. It has the potential to be good. As like an arena pick, it's a decent filler, so it's all around reasonable. It's just not so strong that I can imagine you doing anything crazy with it. Twilight Elder, 3 mana, 3/4. The end of your turn, give your Cthulhu +1/+1 wherever it is. So if we compare this to the Beckoner of Evil, I like the Twilight Elder more because it is a persistent threat. It is getting you value the longer it's on the board. It's not really value, it's kind of like imaginary value until you actually play Cthulhu, but your opponent will feel pressured to deal with this creature. 3/4 stats is very good at 3 mana, so again, same with the Beckoner of Evil, it's just kind of competitive stat value at its mana cost. Doesn't do anything special, but if you can survive until getting your Cthulhu out, presumably the buffs have been useful enough to justify that. One thing I am worried about is 3/4s get removed very easily by 4 mana creatures, specifically by a Yeti. A Yeti will kill a Twilight Elder and still have a 4/2 left over, which for only 1 extra mana is a pretty big disadvantage, so it's possible that 3/4s end up being weak if the game is competitive at the 4 mana slot. We're going to skip the Paladin card for now and finish off the neutral ones first. So the next one I'm looking at is Hogger of Doom, or Hogger Doom of Elwyn, excuse me. Whenever this minion takes damage, summon a 2/2 Null with Taunt. Okay, on paper, I don't think this card is very amazing. 6/6 for 7 mana is not very competitive, and it's struggled a lot in the past with other 6/6s on 7 mana, such as Trogzor, who, by all rights, even seems stronger than this card, yet is not played. This card does have some specific situations where it could be useful. I can imagine a mage, for example, would play this and then use their hero power to damage it themselves so that they get a null out of it. Or you could use some spells where it's taking damage. But if you're using something like a Wild Pyromancer to trigger this, it's also damaging the nulls it spawns. So I can't see this being overwhelmingly effective. Probably a good arena pick, though. I'd say a very solid arena pick. It trades well and it's going to add you creatures to the board. Continuing on the neutrals, we have Eater of Secrets. It has a 4 mana 2/4 battlecry. Destroy all enemy secrets, gain +1/+1 for each. Just a direct, hard counter to anything secret related. With Standard being introduced, Kazan Mystic was going to be leaving the game, so there was going to be no answer to secrets, and it seems Blizzard has opted for the remove all secrets at once choice, which I think we'll certainly see as a tech option in tournaments when secret decks are prevalent, because this has the ability to just devastate your opponent and win a game when used at the right moment. But in general ladder, I can't imagine it being seen very often just because it's such a specific card. You really have to know what you're queuing against. And the final neutral card we've seen so far is Cthulhu's Servant. And I like this card a lot. It's a 4 mana 4/2 with Divine Shield. As a battle cry, give your Cthulhu +2/+2 wherever it is. So 4/2 for 4 mana is not very good, but Divine Shield means that you'll get 2 attacks out of it. There is currently a card, I believe it's a Silvermoon Guardian, that is a 3/3 with Divine Shield for 4 mana. I'd say this is better than a 3/3. 4 damage is a really good attack damage to have. And especially when you have Divine Shield on the creature, more damage is always more useful. Plus, this is also giving your Cthulhu +2/+2, so honestly, you might even play this if you weren't using a Cthulhu deck, because it's just a good 4-drop. But if you're using a Cthulhu deck, I think this is a guaranteed pickup, and this is something I'm seeing as probably a defining feature of the 4 mana slot in the game to come. Okay, so that wraps up our look at the neutral cards. I will go back at the very end and touch on my thoughts overall of Cthulhu so far. But let's look at the class cards that have been released so far. So the first one we see is the Paladin card, Stand Against Darkness, which is a 5 mana summon 5/1/1 Silverhand Recruits. Okay, if we justify this card based purely on its stat cost, it's actually not so bad. It is 5/1/1s, which is 5/5 of total stats, and a 5/5 for 5 mana is pretty good. You could consider it might be an advantage to spread your creatures out. Right now, I think this looks really weak because we are playing in a metagame where a lot of classes are flooding the board with small creatures. But if, say, Cthulhu was a defining feature of the meta, and we saw the typical creatures being 2/3s and 3/4s, it's less likely for people to be having tools to deal with a lot of 1/1s. So this could mean that this card becomes more powerful. Also, it's just nice for Paladins to have a tool to flood the board, because Paladins thrive off of board control, so it can be played. It's clearly not as good as Muster for Battle was once upon a time, but I think we'll still see this used in some decks. The next card is something really interesting to me. Giant Sandworm. 8 mana, 8/8. If this minion attacks another minion and kills it, it can attack again. Okay, so the first combo I can think of this is Hunters have mechanics which make their creatures immune to taking damage for the turn. Both Stable Master and Bestial Wrath prevent your beast from taking damage. So with the combination of those, this could just clear the entire board. It would attack, and until it could not kill something, it would keep attacking. So that's pretty strong in itself. And second of all, it is a beast, and because it is an expensive beast, it helps hunters with any random beast synergy. So Ram Wrangler, Web Spinner, for example. You get more value if you get a higher mana creature, so this card is not amazingly statted on the surface of an 8/8 for 8, but it's a free creature, so if you're getting it randomly summoned, then you could have a lot of power from it. I think as an arena card, this is amazing. It's like a must pick. Yeah, this one could be pretty cool. We haven't seen Hunters succeed with high mana cards too much, but at the very least, getting a Giant Sandworm out of your Ram Wrangler would be pretty satisfying. Okay, the next one, another defining feature of the 4 mana slot is the Calaxy Amber Weaver. So this is a Druid card, Battlecry. If your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, gain +5 health. So if we go back to Cthulhu, what's the chance that you're going to have 10 attack by turn 4? Okay, so you have Cthulhu, it's a 6/6. You play a Beckoner of Evil on turn 2, it's an 8/8. You play a Twilight Elder on turn 3, it's a 9/9, and then it's turn 4. So if you play your average curve of Beckoner into Twilight Elder, it will not be strong enough to trigger the Amber Weaver. The only way is if you either innervate something out or play 2 Beckoners of Evil. So this, on the surface, you know, it might not reach the +5 health that often, but it is a Yeti, so it's already a very consistent 4-drop, one of the best 4-drops in the game, actually. And it can just be better. It just has an advantage to it. So even if you're not succeeding in getting the Cthulhu buff there, you're still fine with this. It's stronger than a Twilight Drake against Silence, because if it's silenced, it still returns to a 4/5. I like this card a lot. I think any Druid using Cthulhu will want this in their deck, and Cthulhu is also very powerful for Druids because of their ability to get creatures out earlier with their mana abilities, so it should be a reasonable archetype as well. Okay, 7 mana warrior card, 6/6 Ancient Shield Bearer. Battlecry, if your Cthulhu has at least 10 attack, gain 10 armor. So already it's much more likely to be triggered than the Amber Weaver because it's happening on turn 7. So the chance you have a 10 attack Cthulhu at that point is going to be a lot higher. My biggest problem with this is that warriors might not be playing Cthulhu. It might not suit their style. Right now you don't see any warriors playing 2/3s. It's just they don't often play creatures in the current way the warriors built, so we really have to see a change in how warriors are created to make Cthulhu usable. But if you're playing Cthulhu, 10 armor is enormous. So if you're going to be playing a warrior with Cthulhu, I think you would definitely include this creature. That is a Pyroblast of health, and you get a 6/6 for 7 mana, which ain't too bad. Okay, the final 2 class cards are what I would say are the most interesting releases we've seen so far. There's 0 mana spells, and Mage previously had never had a 0 mana spell, so pretty hyped about that. Spend all your mana, deal that much damage to a minion. Okay, so let's consider this card. This is pretty complicated. It obviously synergizes really well with some of the Mage other tools which use spells, and it synergizes really well with spell power because you're just getting an advantage on any mana you spend if you have spell power. So with +1 spell power, I think this is amazing. With just neutral spell power, as you go past 5 mana, the value increases. So if you're spending this and you're consuming 7 mana, it was probably pretty well worth it. Or up to 10 mana, and then it's just a Pyroblast, and that was perfectly worth it. But the beauty of this spell is you get a choice of when you want to use it. And mages really thrive on that turn where they can make a lot of things happen all at once and shift the board, similar to a way a rogue can operate, but they didn't have as many tempo mechanics to do it consistently. So seeing a card like this, which lets you use your mana to make those turns play out more efficiently, could be really powerful, and I'm quite excited to play this card myself and see what kind of decks I can build with it. And the final card is a priest card, Forbidden Shaping. Spend all of your mana, summon a random minion that costs that much. Okay, so at lower cost, this is pretty bad. Anything 4 mana or below, it's a random creature, and random creatures will regularly have battle cries or be poorly statted. Something like a Defender of Argus is a great example. For 4 mana, you're getting a 2/3. What this card does do is at higher mana costs, basically 6 mana and above, you're getting pretty good creatures, and it prevents you from having that awkward turn as a priest, where sometimes you get to turn 6, and maybe they don't have anything on the board, but all you have is removal. So this card allows you to make that pick of when you want to use it, and as the game gets later, it gets more valuable. For 9 mana, you can pretty consistently get a great creature. For 10 mana, you're going to get a Deathwing or a Varian, so you could take a toss-up. I think it's pretty good. We'll definitely see this one played, and it has a little bit of random fun to it, which could be interesting to see. So those are the cards that have been released so far. So moving back, and we consider Cthulhu again as the real big dog that has been shaking things up, or will be shaking things up. Some classes I think are going to be much more successful with this than others, but overall it seems like the neutral cards for Cthulhu are well designed to make it so he can be played in almost any class of deck. But I think, so for example, Rogue, Druid are my 2 picks for probably what benefit the most from Cthulhu. You could easily see Paladin, Priest, Mage, Shaman, and Hunter. They're a little more questionable. But there's, and Warrior's also a little more questionable. But there's definitely some options there, and it's not clear what classes it will work for, but I think without a doubt it will work for more than one. So I'm pretty excited to try this card out. I'm looking forward to seeing the rest of the new cards. This was only the first 15, but I hope you guys enjoyed my card review, and you will check out the next one. Thanks for tuning in, guys.